This is Father Gregory Pine,
And this is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
and welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoyed the podcast, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Father Bonaventure, on account of the fact that we now do big recording sessions, we are not as time sensitive, or maybe we're becoming atemporal or becoming eternal. Or sempiternal, never mind, regardless. But now affords us a rare opportunity to be au courant, to be up to date, to be otherwise relevant. So how are you?
I'm doing well. Let's be clear, all of our shows are done live. We only call these ones Livesplaining, but the other ones are, of course, live.
Right.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I'm doing well. It's it's almost February. We're almost there.
Right.
And February is the worst month of the year in many ways. But thankfully it's also the shortest month. Although I have to say, maybe March is worse than February, because March is long but has the same February quality to it, I think. February does February. Yeah. So I don't know. It's tough. Yeah. Both are bad. Let's put it this way. March, Febtober is bad.
So things are bad, but they could get worse. You're in a particular bind when you're trying to determine which of 2 months is the worst, and you're standing right on the threshold of both of those months in rapid succession.
Yeah.
And by rapid, I mean non-rapid, because they're going to feel like forever, as Michael Squints Palladorus once said on that documentary Sandlot. So what we typically do in these situations is we talk about the fact that we are currently suffocating under the weight of a doctoral burden, aka dissertation. How would you say your lung capacity is at present? Would you say that you're gasping for air, or are you already drowning in your own pulmonary fluid?
Actually, I'm snorkeling. We're good to go. It's I finished the draft of my final chapter, so she's ready to go. So just waiting for comments, but it's done ish. It's a bit like I don't know. I have no idea what it's like to be a parent, and nor will I ever. Please God, and. But you come to the end of it, and I imagine it's like you think back one night and you think about your 16-year-old and you say, darn, I like this part about him or her. I should have done better. That should have paid more attention with this kind of stuff. But and then you think, it's going to be okay when it goes out there. It'll get a job. It will, start its own business and employ people and not do horrible things and that kind of. So, I mean, I feel I have a bittersweet feel as you come near the end of this, which I expect you're coming near the end of yours as well. And you think I could have done, maybe I shouldn't have let her stay up past 9 at that time and this kind of thing. But in general, you think, not a murderer, and that's okay.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. I feel similarly about things right now. It's like this could have been better. It still has the opportunity to get better. But also, the only thing that'll make it infinitely better is if I destroy it and start over again.
Yeah,
so that way
right.
it can have a kind of original structure. Because right now I'm just too attached to the structure that I chose at the outset, which was a structure informed by infinite ignorance. It's where we are. But I just penned the final keystrokes, of the draft of my last chapter yesterday. So now I'm doing my subsequent 3 stages of revisions on the aforementioned, where I go back into my footnotes and look at all the things that say follow up on this point.
And hopefully you said enough of which point to follow up on.
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes I do. I look at the things that I highlighted. I'm like, sweet Christmas, young man. What were you thinking at this stage of the game? But that's all besides the point. That actually is the point. It turns out that the whole thing is the point and that none of it's the point. But if we were pretending to actually have a point in this episode, that point would be Ratzinger's legacy. So typically we start with a little 10-minute opening salvo, but we have a ton of questions. So maybe we go for like a 9-minute opening salvo. Father Bonaventure, if you were to introduce somebody to Ratzinger's legacy, where would you start?
Oh man, he's so good. I don't know. I just personally, a lot of people were JP2 Catholics that I grew up with and such, and they knew JP2 and this sort of thing, but I was always a B16 Catholic. I entered the church under B16 and identified with him. And there was something about him. I mean, I remember when Jesus of Nazareth came out, I was still an Anglican, and I remember rushing to Blackwell's when it just arrived, and here I still have the English version, getting the British version of that from the store and starting to read right away, and being so impressed. If there's so many things like Deus Caritas Est, I think is his best, into my mind, encyclical, and that's just tremendous. That's like, Veritatis Splendor. It's just I think that'll remain relevant and important in the magisterium. Jesus of Nazareth, that book, the first book, so from baptism I think onwards, he has the Holy Week one, and then he has the infancy narrative ones, but the middle one, it's decisively good. Just decisively good. Both funny, clever, serious, exegetical but not over the top, spiritually rich and nourishing. Even quotes in there an article from Chronicles magazine, which is a paleoconservative rag that I read and enjoy, and that made it into Jesus of Nazareth, German edition. Wow. So he just gets it. He's good for pithy kind of like, what did Christ come to bring us? If he did not bring like social gospel, and what did he bring? God. He brought God. It just boom. It's like Deus Caritas Est. Being Christian is not the result of an ethical choice or lofty idea, but rather the encounter with a person and event that gives one's life a new horizon and decisive direction. These just titanically impressive things. And then like, we are not, what's the evolution one? We're not the products of mere evolution, but rather we are chosen. And these kind of things you remember. I mean, JP2 had some of these too, of course. Be not afraid, but they were more like pithy with JP. They were more German with Ratzinger. Than the kind of pithy, Hemingway compared to William Faulkner maybe would be the example. So there's just a lot to say about him. Of course, he was a Bonaventure. His second doctorate was on Bonaventure, and he was a Bonaventurean scholar as well, an Augustinian scholar. So yeah, tremendous. But the popular works, you could say, are so rich and meaty that they are hardly popular, but they're entirely popular. That's what I think I like about him.
So as you're talking, you're giving me a lot of good raw material, and now I'm going to see what I can do to riff on said raw material. Does one riff on raw material? No, I think one synthesizes or informs raw material. One riffs on, never mind. Here we go. So one thing that I love about Ratzinger, Benedict XVI, is that some things can be pulled back from the brink. So for instance, as far as theological movements of the 1960s and 70s go, he was headed in a particular direction. Obviously, a man of massive erudition, but he kind of bought into a certain narrative about the modern world, and he was kind of sanguine about the prospect of a concordat between the church and modernity. But he quickly came to discover that such was not the case, or that the possibility of a kind of concordat between the church and modernity was not going to play out as many of his contemporaries thought. And so he pulled back from it. Like I just read a book, A Life of Marie-Dominique Chenu, and he did the exact opposite thing. He saw things going to hell in a handbasket, and he doubled down. The last chapter of the definitive French biography of Chenu is La crise, quelle crise? The crisis, what crisis? He thought like in 1972 that we hadn't taken things farther enough as the wheels were coming off. But Ratzinger saw it, acknowledged the mistakes, and then pulled back. And he did so in a way that wouldn't be described typically as reactionary, but like genuinely conservative. He said, okay, we had this thing. We didn't have a perfect appreciation of what it was keeping in or what it was keeping out. We began to dismantle it, and that was not the move. So now I'm going to set about reconstructing it. And like the way, for instance, that he talks about the moral law, like the 10 Commandments and the identity of Christendom, or kind of post-Christian Christendom. Like those are some really significant contributions. And then the way that informs his Regensburg address, for instance, and this idea of like, faith and reason being really one of the core foundational principles of the West, and how that's threatened in the 20th and 21st century. There's just these things there where, he saw where things were going. He acknowledged them with clear eyes, not an ideologue, which is really fascinating. Yeah. And they pulled back from them in the direction of sanity. It wasn't just an ideological move, right? It wasn't a political move. It wasn't even a whatever move. It was just a Catholic move. And I really appreciate that. And you see the way in which he implemented Liturgiam Authenticam and then Summorum Pontificum. This idea that, like his thoughts on the liturgy too are very much informed by, something that's part and parcel with the liturgical form of the 20th century, but has deep and traditional roots. That's right, because he started off. He was a man who bestrode
concilium and communio, and decided that it was stretching his flexibility physically and otherwise too far as the boats moved, and he just picked a side and said, "I own it," and that's really impressive. His Ratzinger, I mean, most of the time when you're elevated to the cardinalate, the higher up you get in the hierarchy, the less interesting you are to read and say things. This is my experience. A cardinal at some point came here and we were at the House of Studies, and we went over to hear him because we thought we'd hear great stories and stuff, and it was devastatingly boring. Except for Cardinal Mueller. That's a little bit, maybe it's a German thing. But the Ratzinger report that he put out in the 80s or something, that is just gold mine. He does not pull punches. And it's not, but not in an angry way, just a nice, friendly German way, that this is like a grandfather he's just speaking truth, and you come along to it. And there's so many arguments in there for the kind of key issues that still remain the same that he just nailed down. Like, married priest, for instance, he says, I don't know, I guess it's possible if marriage was in good shape, get to it. If you lay people get marriage good shape, then we'll think about it. But if it's 50% divorce rate, why do you think there'll be any different priests? I know priests. Won't be any different. Might be worse. That's a horrible idea. So it's like, that's just nice. You don't have to have like the real fight about, Jesus and the spiritual good of celibacy and all of this. And that's all there. And I'd want to go with it. But just the pragmatic kind of, just think about it for a second. Okay. Let's just play this one out. Going to be horrible. Why would we do this? There's just so many of those things. He's just very good. He's rich. And didn't shy away from it in a way that, like, I mean, JP2 is brilliant in his own way and programmatic, I guess. And I always get a sense that JP2 is like the programmatic theme trendsetter and theme giver. And then there was the theological accountant wandering behind with the books. And he was, working out the details of how this would actually be deployed and such, and kind of figuring this out. It's just really impressive. He made so few mistakes. But the liturgy stuff's great too. Yeah, just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So God bless him. We'll see. Doctor of the Church, probably not. Someone mentioned he might be, and I don't know. I don't know what his doctrine would be particular, other than just greatness. It's not really a
kind
doctrine,
of genius. There's a thing about him that's unrepeatable. Maybe this is a way of giving a backhanded compliment to Thomism. One of the things that I like about Thomism is it doesn't really require you to be that smart. It just requires you to show up for it on the reg, and then it imparts
read the stuff, say the things.
Yeah, it imparts a cast of mind which you can communicate to subsequent generations without too much difficulty. Because it's like, oh yeah, act and potency, no problem. The real distinction, fascinating thing. You get a third principle going on, and then basically you have it all. And then you can just run it. And it's not that it's a system. It's just that it's so distilled as a way by which of addressing the hinges of reality that it feels very easy to wield once you have a sense for the whole. Whereas with Ratzinger, that is not my experience. I'm not saying that he's an unsystematic thinker, but I think what the impression that you get is this is a man of great genius, right? Yes. Not like, oh, I can inhabit the same cast of mind within which he's operating at present. You're just like, dude is smart. And there are so many gems. They're coming so thick and so fast that I can't write them down fast enough. I worked at, my mom and dad had a Catholic bookshop for like 22 years, and it didn't sell many books. So it lost money, which is not a good way to run a bookshop.
You said a Catholic bookstore. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Need I have said more. But my mom gave me permission at one point to redeem gift certificates of people who had died before having redeemed said gift certificates, which was awesome, by the way. Not that they had died, not that they had not redeemed their gift certificates.
New meaning to death wish.
Okay, so I used these aforementioned gift certificates. Thank you, Deirdre Mullen, rest in peace. And I would just buy books. I actually bought The Quiet Light, which is the book about St. Thomas Aquinas to convince me to be a Dominican. But I also bought a couple of Pope Benedict's books. One was a collection of his Wednesday audiences on Jesus, the Apostles, and the early church. And it was just line by line, just going through that. I was just getting bowled over on the reg. I remember reading the one about Thomas, the Apostle. Yeah. And he just has this little throwaway line at the end. He says, it's not so clear according to the exegesis of Gregory the Great whether he is to be commended or whether he is to be condemned for the fact that he doubted. What we do know, though, is that Christ is to be recognized not so much by his face as by his wounds. And I was like,
burned in.
It's like, holy smoke, what an exegetical move. I mean, it's devastating.
I also think he's interesting for Thomists. I think he's helpful for us because he reminds one that that Thomism isn't Catholicism, but like they're not isomorphic with each other in a way, because you run this argument. Benedict, premise one, was not a Thomist. Therefore, if Thomism is this is anthememic, but you'll get it. If Thomism is isomorphic with like either intelligence or Catholicism, he's either not a Catholic or stupid. And the problem is both of those are really difficult to pull off, especially at certain times. So like you just have to, he just stands there as this kind of guy. He goes, not a Thomist. And you're like, yeah, I guess it's acceptable. You know, because you're just so good.
Apparently, one of our confreres worked in the CDF with him in the, say the right dates, Gregory. Probably early 90s it would have been, mid 90s. Regardless, Ratzinger used to like pass him in the hallway. You know, he'd be wearing his Dominican habit, as Dominicans are accustomed to do. And he would say something to the effect of like, St. Thomas Aquinas, great mind, not my favorite.
Yeah. And love, not a Thomist, love your habit. The two phrases. Yeah. Which sum up everything. Yeah.
Apparently too, while he was in charge of the CDF and then while he was Pope, Vatican City had the reputation for being a place where people prayed. I will make no comment as to before or after. I know nothing about that, but people who worked in his curia, you know, like there was a daily holy hour that was attended by many people who worked in the context of the Vatican City. So it's clear that it was a man, you know, we're dealing with a man who prays. And when you read things like The Spirit of the Liturgy or Introduction to Christianity, you know, that certainly comes through.
No, it's really a model. I mean, I think we'll be unpacking his collected works and his kind of genius as it extends through, you know, Wirkungsgeschichtlich through years. Yeah.
Wirkungsgeschichtlich, vielleicht?
Yeah, vielleicht.
So here we go. We're going to go 2 questions. And we typically start with questions from Patreon patrons, but the first question that was dropped into the chat was dropped in before we actually started the live stream, and it's not a question. So there you go. Marcella crushing it. May end up sleeping as it's going to be 11 p.m. here, but thanks, fathers, as always. Be blessed. That means that Marcella is coming to us from, Israel or something like that.
Yeah.
Cheers to you.
Great.
All right. Next question. As a person who has received a declaration of nullity, I have a hard time with the concept of declarations of nullity. I understand the issues that can render a marriage to be invalid, but I can't help but feel that I got a pass for being stupid. I also can't seem to find a way to justify it in light of everything else I believe, especially as I attempt to teach my daughter about the importance of family structure and marriage as it is intended between men and women. Do you have some thoughts to offer? Could you point me in the direction of some resources that may be helpful? I have initial thoughts. Send it to you, Father Bonaventure, afterwards. The first is, so a marriage is made by consent, and a consent is informed by some modicum of knowledge, and as a result of which, we have to insist on the fact that the parties who present themselves for marriage are not coerced or are not intoxicated or are not somehow influenced in a way that would compromise them, and that they have to know what they're doing when it comes to marriage. Like, this is a bond that's permanent, that's faithful, that's fruitful. And if you intend a marriage is made, provided that everything proper to the marriage is observed. But if you don't intend a marriage, then a marriage is not made. And I think part of the reason for which it's difficult to see the difference between what is and what isn't is that we live in a kind of post-metaphysical world. Some people would call it a disenchanted world. And so we're not often in the habit of distinguishing between what is and what isn't, because people are more accustomed to just describe what could be or what sounds nice. So I think that kind of deepening our appreciation for this will mean going back or reclaiming a metaphysical vision of some sort. But Father Bonaventure, your thoughts?
No, I think that's pretty much, I think if you think of nullity as an external, stuff on the outside was looking good, but turned out not to be looking good, then you can misunderstand what marriage is. Reminding ourselves metaphysically, I suppose, that it is the act of consent. It's a human act in these ways that requires a sort of cohesiveness to it and an intentiveness to it that's very serious. It's why I've seen the same Father Gregory. When I prepare couples for marriage, we drill down on consent. I really work hard on how to make this, that they're going to make this act true, so that nullity is not even possible in that way. So I think it's remembering that marriage is the act of two human beings with the participation of God in saying yes to each other in a particular way. And that's not just easy as saying like, hey, you want cheeseburger or not? Like, it requires a real commitment of the will. So there's no need to feel weird about that. I think we just think about the externals sometimes too much. Maybe that's helpful.
Yeah. All right, the next question is for you, Father Bonaventure. What are some quotes from St. Faustina's diary or from the Divine Mercy Chaplet you like to think about the most from Domenico?
Oh my gosh, Domenico, there's so many good ones. To be honest with you, it's I can pick up the diary anytime and flip almost any page and get incredible wisdom to it. But I mean, let's just do it. So 342, for instance, suffering is the greatest treasure on earth. It purifies the soul. In suffering, we learn who is our true friend. It's incredible because you only want to share suffering with who you actually really trust as a friend. You don't just wander up to someone and say, "Hey, I'm having a really hard time," this sort of thing. The person's like, "Who are you?" So like that suffering is this deep bond between us. True love is measured by the thermometer of suffering and this sort of thing. Let's go this one here. Jesus, my Jesus, you alone are good, even if my heart were to make every effort to write of your goodness, at least in part, I could not do so. This is beyond all our comprehension. Goodness of God, yeah, God's just kind of, yeah, he's good, does good stuff. No, totally good. Our goodness is a weak participation, a dim kind of light to that. So just two of those, the 300s and the God's mercy and the greatest attribute and all of that's beautiful. There's the beautiful stories about her conversations with Christ. So I think it's like 961 or something where she says, I'm going to, Jesus, I want you to save as many souls as I stitch here. And Jesus is like, I don't think so. That's really hard. And then she's like, but I can't go anywhere else. So what am I going to do? And he's like, all right, I'll do it. These kind of things. So there's the stories in there, the little koans, you could say that. But I think about those, the loved ones especially. And then final one, if you're a Therese fan, so was Faustina. I think it's 884. This one's been on my mind recently. Here it is. One second. Silence is so powerful. A language that reaches the throne of the living God. Silence is his language. Incredible. Here it is. Jesus, you have given me to know and understand in what a soul's greatness consists in. This is 889. Not in great deeds, but in great love. Love has its worth, and it confers greatness in all our deeds. Although our actions are small and ordinary in themselves, because of love they become great and powerful before God. Love is a mystery that transforms everything it touches into things beautiful and pleasing to God. The love of God makes the soul free. That's just, boom, there it is. So those are some. But just pick it up, read anywhere you want. It's great. The dance at the start, number 7, is good too.
Boom. Here we go. Next question. Although primarily thought of as an incredible, important, and holy theologian, priest, and bishop, that is 2 parallel sets of 3 adjectives, 3 nouns. How would you summarize the philosophy and philosophical influences of Pope Benedict XVI? So obviously he's trained in the classical tradition. He has something to do with this ressourcement movement. So he's very deeply invested in the fathers of the church, both in their philosophical and in their theological enterprise. But like Father Bonaventure said, his primary, shtick, as it were, was Augustinian Bonaventurian. And so that informs his medieval worldview, though he's a man who masters ancient, medieval, and, thoroughly modern wisdom, as it were. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know I'm sure there'll be a book out there. The philosophy of Benedict XVI, or the philosophy of Ratzinger. But actually, as much as we've read him, as much as I've read him, and as much as I care about philosophy, I don't think of a lot of his philosophy. It's like he almost jumped. Most of the time, if you jump through philosophy straight to theology, you get nuts theology. But it's almost as like he kept the philosophy under the hood, and he almost never wrote about it. The thing you could think about, he has a sort of development of history so he has an account of how history works in a non-Hegelian fashion. So his philosophical influence there, perhaps, Newman was a big guide there, but even that's kind of theological. And then his semiotics. So he works a lot with signs and symbols from the Bonaventurean aspect and reading the prose of the world. But even that's really hermeneutics. And so he has that hermeneutics feel, but it's not really strictly like metaphysics. The Metaphysics of Ratzinger would be a book that I think would be short, but not disappointing, therefore. I think he was almost in theology right away, because I think of the biblical stuff. I think because he was a biblical theologian, a Catholic biblical theologian first and foremost, he was able to kind of keep some of the philosophy off to the side because he could ride on the scripture and revelation. That's just my suspicion.
Boom. All right, we're going to do one more question from a Patreon patron, then we're going to skip down a bit and then do questions from folks who are joining the live stream while it's live. So here we go. Hi, fathers. Could you speak on the dangers of self-pity and perhaps give some insight into the roots of it and the virtue of fitting posture to remedy it? Thank you, Mariana. Father Bonaventure, you want to give it a go?
Oh man, the virtues. This is you, right? Yeah. I mean,
humanity. This is you, right?
Yeah, humanity. So.
I mean, I can launch if you want to riff.
No, I don't really have much. I mean, I just want confidence and dangers. I guess here's the thing I would say: the dangers of it. I'll speak about that, and you can speak of other things. There's this sense of our brokenness and talking about our weaknesses and our wounds and all of that we would rightly do, and we've talked about this before. I think that can slide into self-pity when you talk about wounds and despair and brokenness and the sufferings and all of that, and the wounds have to be seen as being redeemable and redeemed. That you're on the way, and self-pity is this kind of stopgap that we can get into, and I think we unintentionally get to stay there because it looks kind of like respecting our woundedness and our fallenness and our kind of the disappointing parts about ourselves, and so it's easy to mistake that first step as the end step to something. So that's maybe a first reflection.
Yeah, I would say two basic approaches. The one is sometimes referred to as Christian nihilism, which is to say none of it matters and no one cares, provided that you hold fast to Jesus. I think that we can assign an importance to things which don't merit that assignation, and that can throw us for a loop. When we care about things as if they mattered more than they do in fact, that's usually setting ourselves up for failure. But then the other thing is just to think about like what you're given, right? So St. Augustine has this refrain that he repeats in one book of the Confessions. It's God, give what you command and command what you will. Basically, the idea is that the Lord equips us and then he holds us responsible to the degree and extent that he equips us. So to some 5 talents, to some 2 talents, to some 1 talent, but you come in for a similar commendation, provided only that you're faithful, right? So that you make good use. That was actually from a homily that you preached when we celebrated a house mass in my family's house, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago. So I think that the kind of governing image that I often use in these contexts is it's like a game of cards. You're dealt a hand. The point is to play the hand. The point is not to turn the cards in and wait till you get a better hand, because there may be no better hand coming. The point is to play the hand. And truth be told, regardless of what hand you are dealt, you can play it well. You can play it nobly. You can play it with a spirit of generosity, etc. And I think that, like, for anyone who's ever watched the World Series of Poker, there's some people who play a 2-7 offsuit better than I would play 4 of a kind. So, boom. All right, we're going to skip to people who are joining us now. We're going to go to a certain green vegetable. Question. Fathers, what book would you recommend to someone who would like to read Aquinas, but who, besides watching videos like this, has never actually read a philosophical or theological work? I'm going to grab real quick. Go. So I would say start with his preaching. So his preaching on the Creed, the 10 Commandments, the Our Father, and the Hail Mary, all of which are available for free online. You just search Aquinas' works in English, and then you'll have a couple of options for the site that you want to go to. You'll find one of them to be more navigable than the other based on your whim. And then once you've gone through the preaching, I would recommend that you next go to the Compendium Theologiae, or it's sometimes called, like, what would it be called? The Light of Faith is the name of the English translation published by Sophia Institute Press. And then once you're through those things, just come back to another live stream and we'll go from there. Father Bonaventure, further thoughts on things?
No, for straight reading Aquinas is initially daunting, I think, but himself, but I think those are the right ways to start with it. And then I think there's a little, if you can find yourself the Pocket Aquinas it's a collection of texts from Vernon Bork. You can get the thing for, like, it's out of print for Image Books, I think, in the 70s, whatever. And it's like $5. You can probably find it. And that's a great little pocket collection. And you can kind of go through, and he has some nice texts that are readable and understandable from the Summa and such. I found that to be very helpful when I was looking at just Aquinas. So the Pocket Aquinas thing, it's called collection by Vernon Bork, is a nice one, compendium of his Summa stuff and others.
Boom. All right. Ryan Markey says, hello, fathers. Ryan Markey, it's great to see you again. Yeah. Emily Matienzo says, hello, Father Gregory and Father Bonaventure. May the Lord bless you and keep you in his peace. And to you as well. Thank you. Hounds of Justice says, how often do both fathers celebrate the Dominican rite? And what is something about the Dominican rite that they love the most?
That's great.
I would say that I celebrate the Dominican rite at this stage maybe once or twice a week. So we join a religious
Wow.
community which celebrates the Novus Ordo. We're encouraged to celebrate the conventual Mass, both of us take that responsibility with a certain gravity. But when we have the opportunity to celebrate a private Mass, or when the people of God ask for a Mass in the extraordinary form, then you'd have opportunities there. Things about the Dominican rite that I like the most. I like that when communicating the life faithful, you say, "May the body of our Lord Jesus Christ conduct you unto life eternal." So it's something about this like body soul composite, which is enshrined in the Dominican liturgy, which I find to be beautiful. I also like the cruciform gesture at the Unde et Memories. So right after the consecration, that you assume a cruciform posture. And I recently received a letter from a Dominican sister. I'd celebrated a Mass for a group of Dominican sisters, and one of them wrote me a letter, and she said, "Seeing the Dominican rite helped me to understand St. Dominic's 9 ways of prayer," which is an ancient manuscript tradition that attributes to St. Dominic like a variety of forms of embodied prayer. And she made the association between the different kind of forms of prayer and liturgical gestures in the Dominican rite. And I found that very beautiful. So that's something I've been thinking about recently at her bidding. Father Bonaventure.
Yeah, I don't celebrate as much as I used to. I used to help out at a Latin Mass community here, and so I'd celebrate a couple times a month on Sundays, the big one, and then a couple times practice and otherwise, and small masses and things. But for some reason, I just with late unpleasantness, certain consolidations are made with Latin Mass stuff, and they moved other things. So I haven't celebrated in a couple of months. I was just thinking I should probably celebrate it again because you get out of practice. It's absolutely gorgeous and it's beautiful. And the Unde Memora et Memoras, we have Dominicans have a particular thing. People obviously notice the Dominican rite is that we prepare the chalice before everything else. Otherwise, it looks like kind of like a Latin Mass, the traditional Latin Mass. You can see otherwise the Tridentine form. But that's also actually a big difference. I think the Unde et Memoras, putting out your arms in the cruciform shape for that period. That really does get in persona Christi, the kind of sacrifice aspect after the offering. So I do like that a lot, and I think I just love the tradition. This is the Mass that our Dominican brothers would recognize. So if we were celebrating Mass in heaven, which we won't be, this would be something that we would be able to talk about. And if I couldn't, since if it turns out we can't read minds, then we have to speak languages they know. At least we can all just kind of say the Mass back and forth to each other, or I can at least. So
bingo. That's it, man. Party on. All right. What are some good ways to best prepare for Lent? This is a question that could be answered at great length, so I'm going to restrain myself. And I'm going to say, think about it, but then have a conversation with another human being about it. Doesn't have to be a confessor or a spiritual director, but I would say vet your ideas and vet them in a way such that they become a little more modest, because I think you don't want to discourage yourself by abandoning practices within the first week. Father Bonaventure?
Yep. I would say whatever you have to do, ratchet back. So if you say, I'm going to take cold showers 5 days a week, cut that down to 3 or 1. If I'm going to do this, cut that down again, because it's easier to build up and it's better to be successful frequently than unsuccessful frequently. I also want to say, God bless you for God with the Wind. Gone with the Wind, that's fantastic. Got Rhett Butler and Scarlett there, so brilliant. So watch that movie again.
So Teresa H says, hello, Father Bonaventure. It was great meeting you in DC at my son's house New Year's. God bless. Prayer, heart, boom. All right. Vicky Sibilia says, what would you say is an appropriate reaction to being denied communion on the tongue? It happened to me last Sunday at a basilica, no less, and leaves me with a deep sadness and frustration. So my first reaction is to say, just know your documentation. So you can consult the passage in Redemptionis Sacramentum, which says that you have the right to receive on the tongue, and then just pull that up on your phone, take a screenshot of it, and have it with you. If you're denied communion in the communion line, I would say that you're within your rights just to, if you're kneeling, rise from your knees, or if you're standing, just to kind of move on. You wouldn't receive on the hands, and then just go back to your place, and then to approach the priest in the sacristy after Mass, and just calmly, as non-judgmentally as you can, although there is a judgment that should be rendered in this particular situation that the priest merits, ask him to receive Holy Communion outside of the context of the Mass. And then if he challenges you on it, you explain to him that you're within your rights. And you don't want to be too persnickety about it or snippy about it, but he's wrong and you're right, and you should seek vindication. Thoughts?
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. Having the document, this stage process, don't make a scene out of it at the time, but to go afterwards and receive, absolutely correct. And God bless you for doing it. I think it's super important that people receive in the tongue. I think as we're our actions and how we receive things makes a difference. And priests, we have hands consecrated and with particular oil so we can handle the sacred species. So you're giving reverence to this, and that priest needs to know that too. So, but I think, yeah, encouraging him, but having the documentation, I affirm it all.
Boom. All right, we're going to do 2 more questions here from this part of the chat and then bop back up to get the rest of our questions from Patreon patrons. So this is AJ Ravichandran says, is Jane Bennett from Pride and Prejudice an exemplar of Christian charity? A cautionary example of how one can go awry in seeking to practice charity, a mixture of both? I'm going to make a somewhat candid and humble admission. Now, it's not humble because I just admitted that it was humble, so that just undoes it as humble. I haven't read this book in 10 years, and I remember very few details because I read all 6 or 7 Jane Austen novels in like one go, and they all blend together, which is not a good way of doing things. So I remember Elizabeth Bennet, but I don't remember Jane. Father Bonaventure, do you?
I think the time where she attacks Elizabeth the Chainsaw is not an example of virtue. I've never read the book. I don't know. I was going to go for it. I was going to riff off whatever you said and kind of make something up.
Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies?
The Chainsaw. Yeah. That's it. That's it.
All right.
No.
So we'll study up, AJ.
Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll study up. Certainly, Alistair McIntyre has thoughts on the matter. Carolyn Kimberly says, Pope Benedict did see the errors of Vatican II and tried to stem the tide of ecclesial destruction. He brought back the traditional mass. No, I think that's a great point to raise, is Pope Benedict was often kind of recalling us to this hermeneutic of continuity, because there were certain persons in the years leading up to the Second Vatican Council and the years issuing from the Second Vatican Council who were operating out of what he would call a hermeneutic of suspicion or a hermeneutic of discontinuity. And the idea was that they made it such, they interpreted it such that Vatican II represented a radical break when his, like John Paul II's hope in unpacking the council's documents, and then his hope, and then like further guiding the church through the implementation of those reforms, right, was to establish a coherent connection between what was and what is. And I think like the way in which he treated the extraordinary form of the old rite was to say like what was holy for one people remains holy for a subsequent generation, which I think is it's just a good disposition insofar as the way in which the mass was implemented 69, 70, 71 was very disrupting for many Catholics, specifically because of the ways in which it was implemented went beyond the text of Sacrosanctum Concilium. Father Bonaventure, thoughts to add?
Well, I think there's an interesting move afoot in some ways that are where we talked about Ratzinger had stepped away from the brink of concilium and kept the continuity, hermeneutics with JP2 and all this. There's recently been this, I think, move to identify, to say actually he didn't really, or these guys really were actually kind of, even though they unwitting pawns, you could say, of that kind of modernist team, and to throw out the whole shebang and say the hermeneutics of continuity is just really the hermeneutics of discontinuity, but with a nice kind of sheen or a surplice over the top or something. And I don't know. I think we should resist that. I think it's too easy. I think in a politicized, over-politicized world, I think it's easy to find enemies and complain and get concerned about it. But I would encourage people to resist seeing Benedict as actually just a pawn of that other side. Even though there are still battles, and even if some of his liturgical changes have not been kept to in the same way, and 180 degrees, I think, is a phrase that comes to mind. Any case, I think we should hold. I would say let's fight the urge to give up on the hermeneutics continuity, at least in interpreting his legacy and JP2's legacy. Whether what we do from here, and that's how we approach it, to not paint those guys as the villains. This is my suspicion. I have thoughts on that.
Yeah. All right, here we go. Bopping back up to the top. Fathers, dating is hard. I realize that this is not your realm, but how should one distinguish between a sense of uneasiness that is caused by the fact that the person is just not right for you, and fear that is caused by your tendency to want to have everything planned out / all future scenarios considered? I'm prone to worry, and I'm not sure whether what I'm feeling is legitimate or if it's just me being overly controlling. I realize that God gives us free will and wants us to make choices. I just have no idea what choice to make or how to interpret my emotions despite having prayed about it. Any advice is appreciated. Diane. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Super honest question. But I think it's, So one thing I would say is you're going to have to treat things on a surface level, and then you're gonna have to treat things on a subsurface level, because you can kind of cope or you can manage on that surface level, but beneath you really need to heal and grow. And that's true for all of us. That's not just true for you. That's true for all of us, because the anxiety, the lack of peace, is the root concern. And how is it that we address that in particular? Well, the ordinary Christian means prayer, sacraments, friendship, penance, study. I think there are other kind of techniques too, which can be of service. Anxiety is on the rise and associated with use of technology. So if you're subject to anxiety, you use dating apps perhaps to meet new people, but you might not want to use other social media outlets insofar as they cause for you thoughts of escapism or thoughts of comparison. So like there are a variety of ways in which you can apply this particular situation. I don't think that it's a responsible answer to simply say you'll know it when you know it, because you might not. But what I do have confidence in is that God is provident, and that God's providence goes by way of secondary causes, and that he supplies us with what we need in order to carry out the vocations that he has in store for us, and that limitations or defects in our choices aren't going to wholly defeat his plans for us. He's always going to make it such that it conduces to the good. All things work to the good for those who love God and are called according to his purpose. Mm-hmm. So I'd say like the root thing is trust, and that trust is going to be grown in the ordinary means that God puts at your disposal for growing in Christian holiness. Father Bonaventure, your thoughts?
Again, it's not exactly my field, of course. But it's not much duty in dating, I suppose. Duty in marriage, but duty in dating is a different matter. But I think there is a sense of a separation sometimes between body and soul on this, or there's a separation between like will and emotions. And if you're living in a state of grace, if you're living the sacramental life, if you're committed to that, you're loving Christ, and you can start to trust, I think, your emotions and integrate them, and so you don't have to worry about them as much. So maybe, when you're approaching someone in a dating circumstance or a dating relationship, if you're not feeling like you like this person, then if you're living an ordered life, and your passions are ordering themselves kind of, or being ordered by your will and your intellect and the soul, body, and all the grace is there, then you can kind of trust those things. And I think then you step into Father Gregory's realm and sit and not worry about missing the vocation, particularly in all of this, but to have a confidence with your passions, if they are rightly ordered, and as you're paying attention to them, and using them to be kind of indicators, and not treat them as alien sources of information that then you have to somehow decode, because it's just, how do you decode a passion? It's not coded in that way. So maybe an integration in the kind of dating life can be helpful.
Boom. All right, last question. It's from the same Patreon patron, Diane. She asks, I teach RCA for adults at my parish, and I'm curious about your stance on initiation into the church. My pastor is definitely of the mindset that catechumens should firmly believe what the church teaches is true and have a deep desire to become Catholic, as opposed to, say, becoming Catholic because their fiance is Catholic, / they just want to raise their kids Catholic, etc. I don't think the reasons I just listed are necessarily wrong. They might not be the purest, but shouldn't we want all people to be baptized? I would hate to turn somebody away in the class knowing that baptism is necessary for salvation for those to whom the gospel has been proclaimed and who have had the possibility of asking for the sacrament. Boom. CCC 1257. Father Bonaventure, you want to launch?
Yeah, I mean, look, God's in charge. So, I mean, it's not like it's up to you, particularly, so that if this person has, if you're worried about, like, wait a minute, the gospel is proclaimed and now baptism is necessary for this person. I've just told them about the gospel and now they're rejecting it. I want them to be saved. It was not up to us. It's up to them. I mean, this is the mystery of free will that God works through in various ways, whether, Molinist or Thomistic or whatever, that he wants to draw them by his love and by their choice and by his grace, and that he's kind of in charge of that. And your job is just to do the best to encourage and bring them into it, because this will make them free and this will make them good. It's not a game. So I guess that's the one side is, don't worry. I guess we don't save people. God does. And then the other one is that depends how deep, the disagreements are. If they don't believe, but they're just there to get it done, useless. Just totally useless. Not going to help them. It's not going to help you. Not going to help anybody in the church. That they might grow into it, but guess what? The church isn't going away as far as I can tell. They can come back. And sometimes, saying, look, this is really serious, forcing the conversation gets them to say, I guess I should take this seriously. I know the new president at CUA, at baptism class for his child. The pastor said, "If you don't bring him to mass, I'm not going to baptize him. This is a serious matter. I need, you need to raise this child in the faith." And he's president of Catholic University because of that conversation with that pastor. And he said, "Shoot, all right, yeah, I guess I should take this more seriously." That's a great witness, and he shared this, so you can find this online. This testimony, a witness to the truth there and the good of it. But one, God's in charge. Your job is to be a steward of His mysteries as much as you're entitled to, given your rank and your status. And I mean, more like, why wouldn't you believe the things? I mean, to see it in a sense of like, why wouldn't they? Not like it's, hey, you got to really believe these special, secret, weird things, and then what funny handshake. But like, this is really good and great. Like, why, if you don't believe this, like, I don't understand. Like, you just want to murder people? I don't get that kind of thing, I don't know.
The one thing that I would add is, so I think God desires that all be saved and come to knowledge of the truth, because that's written in sacred scripture, 1 Timothy 2:4. The baptism are the ordinary means whereby salvation is dispensed. And so we have quasi-confidence that God wants everyone to get baptized. But they're going to be baptized according to faith in the case of adults. So adults should approach with faith, because the sacraments require faith. They're sacraments of faith. They're not magical rites, right? They're sacraments. But I think that what you can do is you can leverage the RCIA program or process or whatever you call it nowadays, because, there's 4 stages to it. There's the stage of inquiry, the stage of the catechumenate, the stage of further enlightenment and purification, and then the stage of mystagogy. And as is the case with any human act, as you progress in it, you become more committed to it. And as you become more committed to it, right, you have to give more of yourself to it. So I think that you welcome everybody at the outset, because what they're doing at the outset is inquiring. But then when you move to the catechumenate, then that's something more significant. And then you have, with the catechumenate, you have like exorcisms and blessings and anointings, and you have the different, like the 3 successive Sundays of Lent before they're elected. You have the 3 scrutinies and things like that. So there's like a tendency that's built into the RSCA program itself, and you can use those and leverage those rights as a way by which to encourage people to invest more in it. And if they don't want it, then they can leave. That's fine, right? Because God doesn't force their hand. He just invites them, and strongly and sweetly, but invites them into it.
Yep.
All right. Oops, that's not the one I wanted. Jacob Jones says, if you were to recommend one of Pope Benedict's works on faith and reason beyond the Regensburg Address, what would it be? I would recommend In the Beginning, which is on the theory of evolution.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I don't have. Yeah, I mean, Intro to Christianity is another one, but that gets deep pretty quick.
It does.
But that's In the Beginning is a great text. Yeah.
Boom. All right. Adam Boyle says, hey, this is Adam Boyle, who was on a Godsplaining men's retreat this past summer with 3 members of his Steubenville squad.
And a stash.
And he's rocking it, man. Pope Benedict was a peritus at Vatican II and was very heavy-handed at the council. To imply that he was anti-Vatican II is incredibly narrow-sighted. He was a man of the council through and through. Oh, right. Boom. Okay, so that's just, it sounds like that's by way of response to somebody else, not to us. Adam, keep crushing it, especially with the mustache. All right, Madeline Rafferty, who's awesome and is often contributing to conversations of just such a sort, and who is posing there, it looks like, in front of the Colosseum, says, hello, I've been thinking about how when suffering is shared among 2 people, a new depth is reached in the relationship. How do I take on the suffering of Christ so to know his heart deeper and love him more and more? Is this the purpose of fasting, or is there more to it? You want to launch? You want me to launch?
You go for it.
All right.
Thoughts, but this is your kind of redemptive
so I
stuff.
think this is actually what I'm writing my dissertation about, basically. That like our Lord lives a human life so that he can manifest and communicate salvation in a way that is best suited to our recognition and reception of it. So he asks the question, what's the best way to get somebody to love you? He says, show that person that you love them. This has been my experience too. When I go to different places in Europe and I talk to young people who want to live their Christian lives, I often will take just an opportunity to affirm them in their efforts, because it's really hard in secular cultures. And you can see them like spring flowers kind of like unfold or open up when you do that, because it's like, yeah, that's true. It is hard to live a Catholic life, and God's grace is operative in my life, and ... right? So I think it's, okay, so, how do you get somebody to love you? You show them that they are loved. Why is it that God's trying to get us to love him, pardon me? It's because that's our salvation. So our Lord opens up his life by passing it through this, humanity, which he has assumed, in order to make known to us, to make available to us in most excellent fashion, the love which actually is our salvation. So the thing that's precious about suffering isn't the suffering itself, it's the fact that it reveals the love, right? It's the best way in which that love becomes, accessible to us. So I think that in the midst of suffering, you're trying to affirm it, for another. You're trying to offer whatever it is that you're enduring or undergoing as a way in which to encounter the other, or as to affirm the other, or as to be present to the other. And I think you can just keep it simple, like keep it modest. Like just to have that person before your mind's eye in the long and lonely moments, or to make it in some way, shape, or form the setting for ongoing friendship and communion. So when it comes to fasting, you're getting in touch with the fact that you're sad, that you're angry, that you're anxious, and you're offering that to the Lord rather than just papering over those particular afflictions by consuming more food or drinking more coffee or whatever it is. So I think that we're supposed to experience our lives as a kind of wound that won't heal until heaven, because ultimately it's only Christ who heals them, and he shows that he is competent to heal them in suffering with us. That's a long way of going about it. But Father Bonaventure.
I don't really anything profound to say about it. Leon Bloy said, I think it's suffering opens spaces in the heart that were not there before or something. And I think that ties into what you're talking about. It's not suffering qua suffering that's good, but rather suffering in a sense expands the ability and capacities for someone to love and to join. It's like knocking down walls in a room and allowing more people in, or allowing more people to spend time and to see them. So I think that's when I think about suffering, it's not, you can't choose it, of course, because you can choose, but like it comes to you and you choose whether to accept it or not as a mission or have you. But it's something when there, you can see it as opening a room to the depth of insight of your inability and your sharing with others. And there's a profundity there, as you say, about truly knowing yourself in the weakness there, and then truly knowing Christ there as well.
All right, we're going to go into the lightning round now. So we're going to do less than 60-second answers, and we're just going to alternate. So we're not going to weigh in on everything. So Father Bonaventure, first one to you.
Boom.
Any tips on how to be more present and less distracted during Mass? And how do I help others to see Mass as more than just an obligation?
Maybe it depends on the masses, but pay attention, focus on the words that are said by the priest. Oftentimes they're either the Mass ordinary parts or the particular prefaces and prayers and such. So focusing on, like, instead of just taking them in and letting them flow over you, like focusing on them specifically and letting the words kind of refocus your mind and sharpen the image a bit. That can be helpful.
Boom. All right. Emily Matienzo says, remember how under Pope Benedict, the words of the Novus Ordo English Mass changed in 2011? The laity felt this as a major change. Personally, I like the changes. Your thoughts? Basically, there was a document which governed the translation of liturgical texts from Latin to the vernacular that was in use 70s, 80s, 90s, and early thousands, called Comme le Prévoit, and it encouraged a mode of translation called dynamic equivalency, I think. And so that governed a lot of those first translations. It was recognized within short order that was not a good hermeneutic tool. And so I think it was Pope John Paul II had published Liturgiam Authenticam, which encouraged a more strict rendering of the Latin texts into the vernacular. And so the third typical edition of the Latin Missal was published as the base text that future translations would be generated on. And so, it was in 2011 that the English language version was produced. And that was just in an attempt to be more faithful to the third typical edition of the Latin text. But like the French version of the new translation just came out this past year, I think, or the year before. Last year. Yeah, last year. So it's ongoing. But I would say that those are good changes insofar as they are more theologically rich, because one of the things that happened with Comme le Prévoit was that a lot of the theological depth was made shallow because it was thought that people couldn't comprehend. Whereas with the present translation, there's more of that. All right, here we go. Karen Kimberly says, Father John Holloway had a brain tumor and shared his suffering with us on YouTube. He offered Mass from his hospital room. When the tumor returned, he went to Lourdes where he was healed. Father Holloway had no self-pity. He offered his suffering for the healing of the church. Boom.
Yeah. Correct. All right, that's my round.
Correct,
your turn
indeed.
again. And it is your turn, unless I'm supposed to answer this question.
Father Pine, my parish book club loved your prudence book. If you were to write a book on another of the virtues, which would you choose? Justice, because that's the one I'm going to write it on. Well,
nice.
Party on. A certain green vegetable says, thank you, fathers. Benry Musk, wow, nice work. Question, can a Dominican friar box for sport? Father Bonaventure?
It's certainly possible. Ought he? I don't know. I guess it's your shtick, I suppose. I mean, like, yeah, grabbing the hidden the bag. I mean, we've all done that in the student tape, in the common room, I suppose, or what have you. But yeah, box. I don't know. I mean, if it's like professional kind of going out and this is the thing you do, I don't know. I'm a little bit queasy about that. Not because of like hitting people is like the boxing aspect of, but all of the sport and involvement in it. We don't really get it. It's not like can Dominican play professional baseball. I mean, I don't know. I don't think so. You ought not to. You're supposed to be praying and studying or something. So I would say maybe pragmatically, I find it unlikely to be that interesting. But I think morally, boxing is if boxing is a sport, and if your intention is not to do anything other than checking people in hockey or something, then I don't think it's any moral procure problem with it.
Boom. Do all Dominicans have to use the Novus Ordo? I don't think have to is the word. I think encouraged to by our constitutions. But there are people who are other religious congregations which are influenced by the Dominicans, which would celebrate the extraordinary form or the old rite more exclusively. Dora Ugrin says, sorry if I've mispronounced that, Dora Ugrin. What qualities of the Catechism do you think we owe to Cardinal Ratzinger's involvement in it? Father Bonaventure, do you have any thoughts on that? I don't.
Well, I mean, he was really instrumental in that. Also, the compendium of the Catechism, I think he basically wrote himself. So that thing was really him kind of combining and working all this stuff. But the Catechism itself, I think the biblical inspiration, the kind of stuff focusing on, it's different than a Thomistic aspect. You can tell it's not a Thomistic structure. But I suspect that's a big part of it. So maybe the biblical focus on the Ten Commandments and then Sermon on the Mount, that kind of stuff. I suspect that at the end of the day, that he probably had a shaping of that.
Boom. Karen Kimberly, thank you, fathers, for answering my question. Yep. Gabriela Rinikova, whom I met in Slovakia in June when preaching for the Ladislav Hanus Fellowship. And then again, when I was back in Slovakia for a retreat for the same group. So practical tips for observing Lent in a meaningful way, using the season to deep our spiritual lives, go closer to God and become better versions of ourselves. So we did like a kind of quick answer to that earlier. If I were to add something, I would say, don't hesitate to do modest things that you want to continue beyond Lent just because they're modest and you feel like Lent should be more dramatic. So I would say approach Lent with an eye towards your spiritual life beyond Lent, rather than thinking of it as like binge fast and binge feast. I would say try to bake things in which will accompany you throughout the rest of your life. Karen Kimberly, by response to Adam Boyle, clarifies. Kyle Whittington says, a friend of mine hopes that one day Pope Benedict will be referred to as the Doctor of Incarnate Beauty. What are your thoughts on that potential title?
Oh, magical. I don't know what to make of that. I mean, okay. You'd have to cash out the... beauty is a tough one, right? Father Gregory and I disagree in some fashions about this. Not the choice of beauty particularly, maybe. Although I don't think you like sharp corners in architecture like I do. But that might give beauty a little too much oomph, but I'm open. Yeah, boom. I don't know.
Hallelujah says, good afternoon, fathers. Hallelujah is frequently to be found on Catholic live streams and is often moderating comments therein. So thank you. You're awesome. Wendy Hovelmans, who I met in Belgium, in Mechelen, in December, who is from the Netherlands, Southern Netherlands, says, fathers, I just learned in ecclesiology that ecclesia in extra ecclesiam nulla salus since Vatican II includes Protestant and schismatic churches. That's not right. So teacher said you're free to change to another one. You don't need to be Catholic to be saved. If this is true, I would be free to go to SSPX and be rid of all the progressive nonsense. I just can't believe the church really teaches this. What does it teach? It doesn't teach that. I just made a video on the Pints with Aquinas channel on extra ecclesiam nulla salus. So that's a good place to start. And then email Godsplaining and we can follow up at greater length. But it's possible to be saved outside of the visible church, but one is saved by Christ in the church. But the church is such that its efficacy extends beyond its visible bounds. And so there are elements of grace and salvation outside of the visible church, but we are all responsible for seeking the fullness. So it's not as if we can say you're fine where you are or you're fine to leave, because you're not. Because we have the banquet and you are meant to be at the banquet. You're not meant to live just kind of off fast food or off scouring from the table. Boom. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Good to see you again. See, hallelujah. Known factor.
Boom. Correct.
There you go. Book on exactly. Holy smokes. I think we're actually going to get to the end.
We're going to do it.
We're doing it.
We got it.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Wow. Just nailed it. Well done.
We just nailed it.
Good job. High fives to everyone. High fives across the screen. Ready? Here we go. Boom.
Nailed it. Oh my gosh. Look at that autofocus just doing double time. So thanks as always for listening to Godsplaining. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok if TikTok continues to be of use in the United States, depending on how that lawsuit goes. Like the episode, subscribe on YouTube or on your podcast app, and leave a 5-star review. Unless you can give a 6-star review, then that would also be encouraged. Wendy Hovelman's teacher was wrong. Boom. Modernism. Love it. Okay. Sorry. Brief interruption there. If you'd like to donate to the podcast through Patreon, please follow the link in the description or show notes. There you'll also find links to shop merchandise, and you'll find updates on upcoming Godsplaining events. So the first announcement for Godsplaining retreats for the summer will be at the beginning of March, and we're going to have retreats summer and early fall. So stay tuned. It's going to look a lot like last year, except spaced out and more awesome. Is that imaginable? No, but we'll make it so. So know of our prayers for you. Please pray for us, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time on Godsplaining.